Most videos about the King Tiger get the gun wrong. The 88mm on this tank wasn't a scaled-up anti-aircraft gun, and that single misconception tells you everything about how we've been lied to about German armor. The Tiger I's main gun, the 8.8cm KWK-36L/56, descended directly from the Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun family. It fired the 88 by 571mm R cartridge. That lineage was real, traceable, and well documented. But the King Tiger's weapon shared nothing with that lineage except a bore diameter. The 8.8cm KWK-43L/71 was purpose-designed for anti-tank work, derived from the PaK-43 towed anti-tank gun program. It fired a completely different 88 by 822mm R cartridge, so physically different that Tiger I crews given Tiger II ammunition found the rounds wouldn't chamber because the cartridge case was too long. Two fundamentally different weapons that happen to share a caliber number. Every documentary, every forum post, every video that calls the King Tiger's gun a bigger version of the Tiger I's Flak 88 is repeating an error that reveals total ignorance of the weapon's actual development. And that error matters, because the KWK-43L/71 could penetrate 165mm of rolled homogeneous armor at 1,000 meters and defeat the Soviet IS-2's frontal armor at 2,000 meters. That performance requirement, the ability to kill anything on the battlefield at ranges where the enemy couldn't shoot back, is what set the catastrophe in motion. The gun demanded a massive turret to house its recoil mechanism. The turret demanded a hull large enough to support it. The hull demanded armor thick enough to justify putting 5 men inside a vehicle that would become the priority target for every enemy gun on the field. And the cascading weight of all those demands landed on a drivetrain designed for a completely different class of vehicle. The King Tiger was an engineering crime scene. German High Command demanded a 70-ton tank using components rated for far less, creating a machine that consumed its own mechanical organs every time it moved. Engineers at Henschel documented the failures during testing. Commanders who took the vehicle into battle condemned the design in official reports. Production began anyway, proceeded on schedule, and continued until the factories were physically overrun. That gun distinction isn't pedantry. It's the first exhibit in a prosecution. By winter 1942, the comfortable assumptions underpinning German armoured doctrine had been shattered on the Eastern Front. Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs that had blitzed through Poland and France were being chewed apart by Soviet T-34s and KV-1s. Those Soviet machines carried sloped armour and wide tracks that turned the old calculus of tank combat upside down. And German tankers, men who'd grown accustomed to technical superiority, found their shells bouncing off glacis plates at ranges where they themselves could be killed. The shock rippled upward from frozen tank parks outside Moscow into the design bureaus of Henschel in Kassel and Krupp in Essen, through the bureaucratic corridors of the Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office, and ultimately into the Wolf's Lair, where Hitler pored over tank specifications with the obsessive attention of a man who believed engineering could substitute for strategic reality. The Tiger I had been, in many respects, a successful panic response. Crude, heavy at 56 tons, but functional. Its combat record against Allied armour was genuinely impressive, even accounting for post-war mythologizing. German Tiger crews in Tunisia, on the Eastern Front, and in Normandy racked up kill ratios that earned the vehicle a fearsome reputation. That success planted the seed of a lethal institutional delusion. What worked at 56 tons would work even better at 70. Erwin Arders, Henschel's chief designer, was a pragmatic engineer who understood metallurgy, gear ratios, and the punishing relationship between vehicle weight and drivetrain longevity. Ferdinand Porsche, whose rival design firm competed for the Tiger II contract, was a visionary whose ambitions routinely outran available technology. His earlier Tiger design had used a hybrid petrol-electric drive system that was mechanically innovative and operationally disastrous. But neither man authored the King Tiger's fate. The men in uniform and the man in the bunker did that. Hitler's obsession with heavy armor and massive guns had metastasized from preference into policy. The Heereswaffenamt specification process was increasingly warped by directives that prioritized firepower and protection, while treating the engineering consequences of weight as someone else's problem. The Inspector General of Panzer Troops occupied an impossible position. Tasked with fielding operationally viable tanks while receiving vehicles designed to satisfy political fantasies rather than mechanical constraints. The Tiger II's combat weight settled at 68.5 to 70 tons, depending on the turret variant, the early Porsche-designed turret or the later Henschel production turret. 13 to 16 tons heavier than the Panther, 11 to 15 tons heavier than the Tiger I. The King Tiger weighed roughly as much as a Tiger I, with an entire additional light armoured vehicle loaded on top. Despite this crushing mass, the Tiger II used the exact same Maybach HL230P30 V12 petrol engine, producing 700 horsepower that powered the 45-ton Panther and the 56-ton Tiger I. Same engine block, same output, 25 tons more vehicle. German records documented the vehicle as severely underpowered in their own internal assessments. The resulting power-to-weight ratio was 9.86 horsepower per ton, 19.8% lower than the already sluggish Tiger I. Engineers at Henschel and evaluators at the Heereswaffenamt measured this deficit, wrote it down, filed the paperwork, and watched the production order proceed unchanged. The transmission compounded the problem. The Maybach Olvar OG 4012-16 Model B provided 8 forward gear ratios and allowed for a twin radius of turn in each gear. Impressive specifications that became operationally meaningless when the final drive gears were grinding themselves into metal shavings under loads they were never engineered to handle. This gearbox was designed for a significantly lighter vehicle. Mating it to a 70-ton hull didn't change its engineering tolerances. Steel doesn't care about directives from the Wolfschanze. French post-war examination of Panthers, vehicles that shared drivetrain DNA with the Tiger II through common transmission and engine components, found that half showed evidence of final drive brake failure after just 150 kilometers of operation. 150 kilometers on a Panther weighing 45 tons. The King Tiger's final drives, bearing an additional 25 tons of hull, turret, gun, armor, and ammunition, had a service life of roughly 186 miles before requiring replacement. The port of Antwerp, the strategic objective of the entire Battle of the Bulge, lay approximately 150 to 170 kilometers from the assembly areas in the Eifel region. On paper, that fell within the 186-mile service life. But straight lines exist only on staff maps. The actual driving distance through narrow, winding Ardennes roads, with detours, reroutes, and stop-and-go maneuvering over broken terrain, would be far greater. And every additional kilometre of punishment brought the King Tiger's final drives closer to destruction. Inspector General Wolfgang Thomale identified the specific failure mechanism in November 1944. The Tiger II's double-link track caused sudden jerks during steering and over uneven terrain that the final drive simply couldn't withstand. The track system and the drive components were fundamentally incompatible, a problem identified during testing, documented in technical reports, and left unresolved. Designing an entirely new drivetrain would have delayed production by months. Germany didn't possess. Reducing the tank's weight meant removing armor or the gun. Neither option was politically survivable for anyone in the chain of command. So the assembly line kept running. Irvin Adders confessed to the negligence in terms that leave no room for charitable interpretation. The failure occurred because the Tiger II went into production without considering the test results. Henschel's own chief designer stated in plain language that mass production commenced while the test program was still revealing fundamental flaws. The Eastern Front was hemorrhaging. Hitler demanded heavy tanks. The production schedule had become a political commitment. So test results were set aside, the assembly line started, and 19-year-old tank drivers who had never heard of Irvin Adders climbed into machines that Adders himself knew weren't ready. Soviet testing of captured Tiger IIs in August 1944, the first month the tank saw combat at the Sandomierz bridgehead, revealed problems so basic they read less like an engineering assessment and more like a coroner's report. The track tensioning mechanism required adjustment every 10 to 15 kilometers. 15 kilometers between adjustments. That's the distance of a suburban commute, demanded every single time the tank moved a meaningful distance. Soviet evaluators didn't need to push the vehicle to its limits to find its weaknesses. Ordinary movement exposed them. The Sandomierz bridgehead in August 1944 marked the Tiger II's very first month of combat, and Soviet forces were already capturing the vehicles and subjecting them to evaluation that same month. The most heavily armoured, most powerfully armed tanks in German service were being lost before the design had even had time to prove itself in the field. The maintenance burden on units actually operating the King Tiger in the field confirmed that the vehicle was consuming itself faster than any enemy could. 10 hours of maintenance for every single hour of combat operation. For every hour a King Tiger spent in the fight, its crew and maintenance personnel spent the equivalent of a full working day and overtime, keeping it functional enough to move again. Sherman crews maintained their vehicles with relatively basic tools and operated for days between major maintenance intervals. A King Tiger battalion spent the overwhelming majority of its existence not fighting, but repairing, a formation of mechanics who occasionally got to fire a gun. Despite this mechanical pathology, the physical design of the Tiger II incorporated geometry that was, by any honest assessment, stunning. The sloped glacis plate borrowed its angles directly from lessons the T-34 taught German engineers, an acknowledgement, built into the steel itself, that the enemy had been right about armor design. The angular Henschel production turret was visually menacing in a way that transcended military utility. The interleaved road wheels gave the suspension a visual density and mechanical complexity unmatched by any American or Soviet design. At extreme range, the KWK-43's accuracy was devastating. 2,000 meters out, it could kill anything the Allies or Soviets fielded. If mechanical perfection existed in a vacuum, divorced from logistics, fuel, terrain, and the brutal arithmetic of industrial war, the King Tiger would be exactly what its designers intended: the most lethal armoured vehicle on Earth. It didn't exist in a vacuum. It existed in a country running out of molybdenum. Molybdenum is the alloying element that gives armour steel its combination of hardness and toughness, the ability to stop a shell without shattering when struck. Germany had never been self-sufficient in molybdenum or in the other critical alloying elements: nickel, chromium, manganese. These materials came through trade deals with neutral nations and supply chains that Allied bombing and naval blockade had been systematically strangling since 1943. By mid-1944, when King Tiger production ramped up, the metallurgical foundation of the program was crumbling. Post-war Allied metallurgical analysis of captured vehicles documented the consequences. The lack of molybdenum caused the Tiger II's face-hardened armor to become extremely rigid and brittle, prone to cracking and lethal internal spalling when hit. Internal spalling is one of the most gruesome phenomena in armored warfare. A shell strikes the exterior plate and fails to penetrate, but the impact sends razor-sharp fragments of steel from the armor's interior surface flying through the crew compartment at velocities sufficient to kill or maim every man inside. The armor holds, the crew dies anyway. Nominal armor thickness: 150 mm on the front glacis, 185 mm on the turret face, was genuinely formidable on paper. Paper specifications assume consistent metallurgical quality. By the second half of 1944, consistent quality was exactly what German industry could no longer deliver. German metallurgists attempted to compensate by increasing carbon content and using alternative hardening processes, but the results were inconsistent and frequently counterproductive. A vehicle whose entire design philosophy centered on surviving hits was being assembled with armor that might fracture like pottery when struck by weapons it was theoretically immune to. Quality control problems spread across every mechanical system as Germany's industrial base deteriorated. In the latter part of the war, the Tiger II suffered from compounding failures that the lack of alloys only accelerated. Engines were assembled by labourers working double shifts in bombed and repaired facilities. Transmission components were machined from steel alloys falling below specification because specification-grade materials simply didn't exist in sufficient quantities. Armour plates arrived at the assembly hall with metallurgical properties varying from batch to batch. The vehicle being bolted together in Kassel in late 1944 bore the same designation as the one described in the engineering drawings, but its material reality had drifted so far from design intent that the already marginal drivetrain was more likely to fail, the already brittle armour more likely to crack, and the already slim probability of reaching the battlefield was shrinking with every production lot. A single King Tiger cost 321,500 Reichsmarks. A Panther, mounting a high-velocity 75mm gun capable of defeating virtually all Allied armour, carrying sloped armour directly inspired by the T-34's lessons, faster on the road, more reliable, and dramatically easier to produce, cost roughly 160,000 Reichsmarks. A Stug 3 assault gun, the unglamorous workhorse that arguably destroyed more Allied armour than any other single German weapon system, cost roughly 82,000 Reichsmarks. One King Tiger bought 2 Panthers, or nearly 4 Stug 3s. The entire production run of approximately 489 King Tigers represented, in Panthers not built, nearly 1,000 additional medium-heavy tanks that could actually reach the front line and fight. Every Tiger II that rolled off the Henschel line was a Panther that never existed, spare parts never manufactured, fuel never allocated to machines that could burn it productively. The King Tiger didn't just fail on its own terms. It actively consumed the resources that could have produced vehicles capable of succeeding on theirs. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Offensive. Germany's last strategic armoured reserve would punch through American lines in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg and drive to Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies.
Schwere SS-Panzerabteilung 501 committed its King Tigers attached to Kampfgruppe Piper, the most aggressive thrust in the entire offensive, commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper. Piper was a convicted war criminal whose brutality at Malmedy would rightly define his legacy, and the most aggressively committed type of commander the SS produced. His tactical violence was legendary. His ideological fanaticism was absolute. If anyone on the German side could force the Tiger II to perform, it was him. He couldn't. King Tigers broke down on the narrow Ardennes roads before reaching the line of contact. Bridges that were supposed to support the advance couldn't handle 70 tons. Route after route closed to the heaviest vehicles in the column, forcing detours through terrain that punished their already failing drivetrains even further. Vehicles that did reach forward positions arrived with final drives already degrading, engines straining, fuel tanks draining at rates the shattered German logistics network couldn't replenish. The road network in the Ardennes, narrow, winding, carved through dense forest, was the worst possible terrain for a 70-ton vehicle, its sheer weight turning every soft shoulder into an inescapable trap. King Tigers that bogged in soft ground couldn't be recovered. Recovery teams could do nothing with 70-ton dead weights on narrow roads. They sat where they stopped, blocking the routes their own lighter vehicles needed to advance. The spearhead's most powerful weapons became obstacles for the spearhead itself. The tactical power of the KWK-43, its ability to kill at ranges no Allied tank could match, was irrelevant when the platform carrying it was immobilized long before reaching its first waypoint. American forces encountered King Tigers not as threats, but as abandoned hulks, their crews having disabled the vehicles and retreated on foot when mechanical failure stranded them without hope of repair or recovery. The gun that could kill anything at 2,000 meters sat silent beside a Belgian road, its breech cold, its crew gone, its final drives shattered. Piper wrote his assessment of the vehicle he'd commanded in battle, and his words carry a weight that no post-war historian's judgment can match. They come from a man who staked his unit's combat effectiveness on the King Tiger and watched it fail. It appears to me as senseless to go over a weight of 70 tons. Senseless. From the commander who drove them into the Bulge, from a man not given to restraint in language or in action. His condemnation came not from timidity, but from fury. The rage of a commander who watched his spearhead grind to a halt because the machines broke before the enemy could break them. From Sandomierz in August 1944 through the Ardennes in December, the pattern held with crushing consistency. Every major King Tiger deployment was strangled by breakdowns that negated whatever tactical advantage the gun and armor provided. Vehicles abandoned by their own crews, not because the enemy had beaten them, because the final drives had died, the engine had seized, the transmission had locked, or fuel simply couldn't reach a vehicle that drank it faster than the collapsing logistics network could supply it. Of the approximately 489 King Tigers built, more were lost to mechanical failure and abandonment than to enemy action. Against that failure rate, the production cost becomes obscene. Approximately 489 vehicles at 321,500 Reichsmarks each, totaling over 157 million Reichsmarks, poured into machines that more often killed themselves than the enemy killed them. Those 157 million Reichsmarks could have produced over 980 Panthers. Vehicles that, while far from perfect, could at least be counted on to reach the battle. German production planners knew these numbers. They approved them because the King Tiger had become a symbol,
and symbols don't answer to cost-benefit analysis. Arders knew the test results had been ignored. Tomale documented the incompatible track and final drive system. Piper, the most aggressive armoured commander the SS could field, called the weight senseless in writing. Every link in the chain, designer, evaluator, combat commander, flagged the same fatal flaw, and the institutional machinery ground forward regardless, feeding crews into a vehicle that was magnificent to look at and catastrophic to operate. The King Tiger was meant to be the ultimate expression of German engineering superiority. Beautiful lines, lethal gun, armor beyond anything the Allies fielded.
What it became was something else entirely. The definitive case study in what happens when institutional arrogance overrides the people who actually understand steel, gears, and the merciless physics of moving 70 tons across broken ground. Wasted potential, wasted Reichsmarks, wasted lives. The crews who climbed inside turned the ignition and started counting down from 186 miles. Subscribe for more stories like this.